Welcome to Creepypasta. Please like, share and subscribe. This will help us make more content for you. Thank you.
Someone came home from the hospital with us. This occurred over 20 years ago, but is still fresh in my mind. My son was born early, at 32 weeks. We were lucky, and he had few issues, and we were able to bring him home a month after he was born. He came home on oxygen and caffeine due to bradycardia. Once we were home, strange things began to happen. The cat refused to go in his room. And before he was born, I was forever removing said cat from his room. Our dog would sit at the bottom of the stairs and tilt his head as if he was listening to something. I would be changing his diaper and start talking as I thought his dad just came into the room, only to turn and find out I was alone. A friend gave him a peekaboo Big Bird toy that would say, "Peekaboo," when you covered, and then uncovered its eyes. This toy would go off all the time. Even after I put it into a box in the closet. I often felt I was not alone in that house. My parents had given us an Angel Care baby monitor as a gift. This had a pad that was placed under the mattress and an alarm would sound if it did not detect any movement after a certain amount of time. As our son was tiny, only 5 pounds when he came home, this alarm would often go off. I would wake up, walk into his room, turn it off and check on him. He was always fine. And I never felt that it was anything but the fact he was so tiny that the pad didn't pick up his breathing. During this time, I would often dream of a woman I would find in his room. I never saw her directly, but would dream I saw the shadow of a woman with long hair, standing and reaching into his crib. The dreams never scared me, but I did find them very odd, but comforting at the same time. I can't remember how long he had been home, but it was at least a month. He was still on oxygen and still on caffeine. Our bed was to the left of our bedroom door and I slept on the right-hand side next to the door and my husband slept on the left-hand side. I was asleep and was woken up by being shaken roughly on the door side of the bed. I woke up and looked over at my husband and said, "Why are you shaking me?" only to realize he was completely asleep and on the wrong side to have shaken me. I immediately jumped up and ran to my son's room. I flipped the light on, something I had never done to this point, and heard a gasp from the crib. Often when babies spontaneously stop breathing, you just need to startle them to begin again. I truly believe that he had stopped breathing and my turning on the light startled him into breathing again. After this episode, the dreams and strange occurrences with the pets and toy continued. Until my son came off the oxygen and caffeine. Once that happened, the odd occurrences stopped. The pets stopped acting weird and the Big Bird toy never went off on its own again. I believe that someone came home with him, to keep him safe. The feeling I got from my dreams was it was a young woman, maybe early to mid-20s, and indigenous. I'm Canadian. I will always be grateful for them watching over him, and shaking me awake that night, so I could startle my son into breathing again.
Comments. This story is wonderful. I have one to add. When my ex's sister was a few months old, her parents were both woken up in the middle of the night, one night, to the sound of a piercing woman's scream. They both woke up, startled, and the dog tore out of the bedroom, into the baby's room. They ran in and found her completely blue. They were able to perform CPR and bring her back. There was nobody in the house to scream like that, and they all were woken by it. Whatever it was, it saved her life. I've heard that the souls of many newborns up until a certain age, 1-2 years old, are still very much connected to the non-physical world and spirits can easily interact with them. Most spirits around us are spirits that haven't moved on yet, due to their strong attachment to Earth, but they are mostly benevolent, so it's nice to think of a spirit hanging around the hospital or something, decided to look after your baby.
Some cultures consider it a guardian angel, as was previously mentioned. Most cultures around the world have some sort of good creature, that counteracts the bad creature, i.e. helps instead of does harm, regardless of what you call it. It sounds like a guardian angel. As for the form it took, that could be completely voluntary. It took on the form that would be most appealing to you. A story of a child who complained of a boy jumping on his bed. 3 nights later a car crashed into his bedroom. Keep in mind I have no solid proof of this claim, but it is my belief that a guardian angel will take on the most appealing form to you. The form that will scare you the least. After all, what's scarier, a woman standing over your son's crib, or a 10-foot tall demonic beast with sharp claws and fangs?
Bizarre forest behind our house forced us to move out. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house, on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins, or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees, to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises, like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person, walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure, standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it. Like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted. And she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard, staring through her window, and when he ran outside, to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped bothering, even opening the door, until one rainy night, when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open, and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the 3rd or 4th time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage, because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward, as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was, while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later, while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window, wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a big fence built around the backyard, and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open, when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being opened that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised, just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little, I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there, in the forest, behind our house at night, but I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole.
Comments. I grew up on the Great Plains, and while I didn't live against woods, I had similar experiences with the cornfields, including with animals on the property line. One time, when I was playing with a friend at night, we crossed the line into the cornfield and we both heard a scream coming from the left of us in the field. My friend heard a woman yelling muffled words, and I just heard a woman's blood-curdling scream. We both turned and ran back, but I was behind. Something grabbed my jacket from behind and I fell hard, but got back up and kept running. The feeling of sheer terror shed off of us, as soon as we crossed the boundary line back to the yard. We also saw figures and floating lights in that field. Always after dark. Always past the yard line, into the field.
I was raised in Colorado, and currently live in a house backing onto a forest, so I appreciate almost every aspect of this story. I would not trade the woods behind me for anything, as I like the privacy. But the woods can be a scary place. I wonder if there's something in it that taps into our primordial selves, an evolutionary, simmering terror burned into our DNA, of being surrounded in the dark by predators. The voices you described were beyond scary, but I must say that I have never seen a situation where dogs just wouldn't go beyond the tree line. That, to me, is the most worrisome element. You can write off the voices as the trickle of a stream, or the sound of voices back at the house carrying in some odd fashion. But the dogs? Animals know.
I like to remain skeptical of stories like this, since they're easy to manifold, but this one hits pretty close to home. We had some similar experiences, though not as extreme, in a place we lived at when I was a teen. The house was an old tenant farming house, on a property that had been a larger plantation at one point, and it was fairly secluded and backed by woods. We had a lot of weird and eerie things happen, including shadowy figures and strange knocking. A constant undercurrent of negativity ran through the place.
OP, have you seen the TV series, These Woods Are Haunted? If not, and if you are interested in learning about the phenomenon you experienced, I highly recommend you watch it. If you skip to the newest season, there is a girl, her story has uncanny similarities to yours. Like so many details are identical, it's really weird reading your story, because it shows a very distinct, repeating pattern that is occurring to people all over the country. I also recommend you share with your brother so hopefully he can find some people's stories to relate with and maybe find some closure. I lived in a very haunted house in Hawaii for a couple of years. It took me a good 5 to 8 years to get over being scared of being alone in a house at night. His story is much more severe. Maybe hearing from others who went through what he went through could be therapeutic.
Do you have a creepy story? Please share it with us in the comments, and we will post it on the channel. Please subscribe. Thank you.